you. You're supposed to be dead!
Yes, you read that title correctly. I'll give it a rest. Now basically all of you watching this video know that I've been one of the more outspoken critics of the Owl House. I mean, I made a 40-minute video criticizing the first season. I'd say I'm rather passionate about this discussion. However, when I made this video, I didn't expect it to completely poison any and all discussion relating to this show. And that's because in retrospect, I think this video is terrible. Not because I disagree with the majority of things I said about the first season, although there are things I am absolutely going to correct myself on, but because it shows very obnoxious growing pains for how I write my videos and communicate my points. I should also probably dropkick the morbidly obese elephant out of the room. The edgy jokes in that video are super tryhardy and are straight up cringeworthy to look back on. Some of them not really aging well entirely, like I remember calling Luz retarded at one point as a joke because I myself am on the spectrum, and then a few months later she was canonically confirmed to be neurodivergent.
Fucking what the fucking fuck? Who the fuck?
Over the past year, I've grown out of the mentality of just going, look, minorities, funny, as a form of shock humor, because it's not only pointlessly offensive, but also there were people who thought I was an actual bigot and agreed with them, which made me quite uncomfortable. But there are two reasons I wanted to make this video. Number one, because a bunch of circle-jerking chimps have essentially hijacked the first video and are using it as some sort of bible to base their opinions around, which has made any and all discussion pertaining to this show a matter of who has the extra chromosome. And two, the Owl House Season 2 is pretty damn good. I know, this may be a lot to take in, and YouTube videos are scary, I understand. I can already feel my Discord server staging a coup behind my back, but bear with me. A lot of people are under the impression that I think the Owl House is a terrible show, despite me stating that I thought it was okay, and I've had a concerningly large group of people, most of which thankfully removed from the majority of the last group, who take my video at face value and proceed to parrot every criticism I have for it with all nuance removed. There's also a minority of people who think I agree with not having gay people in cartoons just because I thought Lumity was rushed. That doesn't make much sense. So I think you can understand why I want to give credit where credit is due, because despite all of my issues with the first season, I can't deny that the Owl House Season 2 is a massive improvement and I highly recommend it. Why? Well, we're about to find out, so strap yourselves in. First though, let's correct a few points that I got wrong in the first video, as well as elaborating on ones that some people didn't understand. I have had a lot of people say that I think Gravity Falls invented mysteries in cartoons as well as episode concepts like body swapping, just because other cartoons have them, including the Owl House. I'd like to make it clear right now that Gravity Falls did not invent any of that. That's not what I meant, or actually said. I was talking about how mysteries started to become more commonplace in story-driven cartoons after Gravity Falls ended due to its success, and that it was a noticeable pattern. Not that they were explicitly trying to copy this one Disney show. And my claim about a few Owl House episodes being rather similar to existing Gravity Falls episodes was only made because Dana Terrace had previously worked on Gravity Falls. So it's not the fact that Owl House uses a few cartoon episode tropes, it's the fact that these episodes also happen near identically in Gravity Falls, a show that Dana had previously worked on. I will admit my hyperbole of look guys, this is plagiarism, my dick is massive, may have gone under the radar, and I don't think this is a massive sin since these episodes really aren't that bad, but I still think comparisons can reasonably be drawn. But you're free to disagree with that. I also acknowledge that Luz is able to use a staff without having a bile sac on her heart. I still think that she should have stood no chance against Bellows, but it isn't enough to make her a bona fide Mary Sue, if you can even stomach me using that term with how misused it is these days. My complaints relating to Ida being useless don't really hold that much weight, as the focus of the show has clearly shifted away from teaching Luz how to learn magic. However, I will stand by the fact that they drag out Ida's laziness to a borderline insufferable degree, and I still feel like drop-kicking a toddler each time she makes an excuse in episode 12. One of the dumbest complaints I think I had was broadly generalizing each episode as being made with a certain formula of Luz doing something she's not supposed to and then dealing with the consequences, only to not learn anything by the next episode. While there are some episodes like this, namely, and I still feel like Luz was just a tad too reckless, this is a sweeping generalization of the actual show, and not every episode falls under this description. And in terms of general issues with my first video, I think I'm going to cut it off there because I'm getting a tad sidetracked. But I may list some extra stuff in the description, I don't know. I mostly stand by a lot of my points in the first video, like the world building being flawed, characters being inconsistent, a few generic episodes, a bit of wonky dialogue, and some really odd pacing. Overall, in spite of these issues though, I do enjoy season 1 of the Owl House a fair bit. It's funny, the action and animation are cool, the world building, while flawed, is still rather intriguing, and the characters are fun to watch despite their inconsistencies. Now with that out of the way,
it's time for the moment you've been waiting for!
The Owl House Season 2 is pretty freaking good. However, it's quite a shame that I have to start finally being into the show when Disney's given it the X. Now, I'm not much of an expert on ratings, but from what I could tell, Owl House never really had terrible ratings unless it's their social credit in China, and you can make arguments about kids not being too interested in story cartoons, because while yes, you are right about that, Owl House's cancellation specifically confuses the hell out of me. The Owl House was cancelled pre-season 3 due to it not fitting the Disney brand. You what?
You little rat!
What bloody dimension do you live in? You literally greenlit the show. What is wrong with you? Regardless of the explanations Dana gave for the show's cancellation, these are the words of a Disney executive talking complete shit. If the show was too dark for kids, then I'm surprised that Amphibia is somehow still alive, because that show... okay, spoilers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1... I've heard that it's something along the lines of them wanting to direct their more mature programming towards Disney+, while the Owl House was contractually binded to the Disney Channel. But I'd hardly refer to Owl House as some profoundly mature show, unless your mind is in the gutter. Don't get me wrong, the show can get very dark and mature, but it's hardly content that would scare or confuse children. Again, to use Amphibia as an example. Yep, that seems fine to me. Now, I'm hardly one for conspiracies. That's a lie, but I would honestly bet money on the show's cancellation being the result of the LGBT rep at this point, because as cringe as it may seem to automatically assume bad faith reasoning for why a corporation would possibly cut a promising show short, it's Disney, so fuck them. They clearly protested the idea during the show's production. Dana had to fight to make the show as gay as it is, and Season 2 is in stark contrast to Season 1 by not just being slightly gay, but being openly gay. And you'd think of how much virtue signaling Disney does, they'd be fine with this. I'm fine with it. The relationships feel a tad more natural in Season 2 because the pacing is a lot better, and it's not like they're any different to how straight relationships are handled in most cartoons. So is the answer just as simple as Disney being a faceless corporation that only wants your money and not actual progress? Well, yes, that is a fact, but we may never truly know exactly if that's why Owl House was cancelled. Apologies for the rant, but overall, Owl House Season 2 was a lot tighter in the writing and pacing department, and I think that's definitely what won me over here. Season 1's biggest problem was undoubtedly its absolutely horrendous pacing. Hell, even devoted fans of the show have agreed that the pacing of Season 1 is not exactly great. I almost suffered a fatal stroke by the end of the finale, among other things.
Dad, you have to stop! Yeah, what's happening to Ida?
That's a TV microphone? It's not gonna make the crowd hear you any better, man. So while there are still pacing issues, the show runs at a much more consistent, fast pace and manages to properly give information to the audience without overwhelming them, which is in contrast to the finale of Season 1, that is suffering from such intense sensory overload that if it were a person, I'd be surprised if it managed to climb out of the abortion bin. Not to mention, the characters are finally being properly fleshed out and are showing signs of their growth, which really adds to the investment. I'd love to list all of my praises here, but I'd rather go through each episode and detailing why they work. One thing that immediately struck me as I began watching the first episode of the season was the dynamic between the characters. The characters are arguably the strongest attributes the Owl House has, and I admit that it took me a while to really warm up to anybody in the first season. And in all honesty, the first half of episode 1 had me slightly worried, and this was due to a few returning issues. For starters, I found it particularly odd that everyone has gone back to treating Ida with no more than a when they literally chanted for her to be let go of her petrification, which was, according to Luz here, a week and a half ago. It also still bothered me that Lilith got off so lightly for everything she had put Ida through, as well as being the central antagonist of the previous season. Although I will elaborate on this soon because they actually managed to turn me around on that. And Ida is still unironically ranting in the middle of the street about how she's cool and epic and totally fucked everyone's mom, before then saying that she needs to lay low. Yeah, this happened a few too many times last season and you always got in some kind of fucking trouble for it, so maybe don't. Aww. Actually, I'll take that back. She doesn't do this for the rest of the season. GG, Ida. It's this kind of inconsistency that I felt plagued the first season, and I wasn't really on board until halfway through the episode, where the quality seemed to take a massive leap. Luz goes for a high reward bounty so that she can help out Ida, which at first would seem like Luz doing something reckless because she's completely oblivious again, until it actually starts going and we realize that Luz has definitely matured after the first season. She's competent with the magic that she's practiced, and while she's always had helping people on her mind, most of the time, her reasoning for why she's doing what she does is so much more compelling, and you really start to grasp the situation that she's in, as well as how she views everything. She took everything from the petrification and the consequences of it as her own fault. She's putting this burden on herself, and it feels realistic for a girl her age to do so when put in this scenario, even if it's inherently a self-destructive mindset. For the first time in this series, I actually feel invested in this character now. And while Luz is still goofy like she usually is, you really feel how much she's changed, and I welcome that. Ida also has the same bad habits as Luz, unintentionally sabotaging her mission just so she can steal some treasure, but it's clear that Ida has gotten attached to Luz, and it gives her seemingly selfish antics a lot more depth now that she's gotten to know her. Whereas before, while Ida still cared for Luz somewhat, it was clear that she did a lot of things purely for her own benefits. By having the characters grow like this and giving them these moments away from the action, it allows us to become more invested and attached. And that's saying something when in terms of mannerisms, Luz and Ida are the same as last season. It's the added character depth being introduced at a consistent pace that allows this to work. Obviously though, this episode isn't just centered on the characters, we need a way to kickstart the season's story. Enter the Golden Guard. While his introduction through Lilith was a little hasty, he soon makes his appearance, and I think he's easily the most interesting character so far, but we'll get to that soon because right now there's not much to him. Decent first impression though, he manages to strike that balance between a playful bad guy and an intimidating foe, which makes him fun to watch. I am a little intrigued as to how they managed to pull off this shadow trick, but that's going into nitpick territory. Overall, I was very impressed. It wasn't mind-blowing stuff, but it was a solid episode and a good start to the season. Oh right, Lilith is here. And, Hootie. In all seriousness, the brief moments Lilith got in this episode were alright, and did a decent job at downplaying the suddenness of her redemption, which I still feel wasn't done properly. But it's a small thing, really, and all things considered, making her a bitter dork who learns to be open to help works for her. And I won't lie, her friendship with Hootie is pretty cute, and it's worth destroying my eardrums for. Almost.
I'm not commenting on that. Hootsifer.
A nickname!
You see, the interesting thing about episode 2 is that it's yet another episode that develops Amity, but it also gives us a lot more context on the kind of people her parents are. Cartoon MILF, my fucking thing.
Is there a problem? Yes, I get the joke. MILF moment. Oh, Dahlia Blight.
Please, this is getting out of hand. Stop, please.
Children cartoon MILF, my fucking thing. Dahlia MILF.
You get no bitches!
This is what happens when bottoms find their first abusive cartoon character. She can literally frame you for murder and you'd be whacking it off in the interrogation room.
That's unacceptable.
Back on topic, Amity proceeds to get more development here, standing up to her emotionally abusive parents.
No, he will never fuck you.
And we get more Lumity fuel, with the plot centering around Luz and her friends being reluctantly suspended after Amity's parents request them to be chucked out because it's causing Amity to be distracted, and Luz helping Amity's parents in order to get back in. I also appreciate that Emra and Edric had their behavior toned down to sibling teasing instead of off-the-charts asshole, and I actually enjoy when they're on screen this time. The episode really emphasizes just how much control Amity's parents have over her, as well as how much influence they have in the Boiling Isles. It's a neat and substantial bit of world building that doesn't hit you over the head with details. Yes, I am extremely bitter, how could you tell? And it makes for an enjoyable episode. However, there's still the issue of Gus and Willow being present simply for moral support and not being actual characters. Guys, I don't dislike them, they're just not interesting. Interested in how Gus went through puberty in the span of a week though.
That's cool. I just hope it helps Ida learn my name.
That kid's balls didn't just drop, they fucking swan dived. There is a B-plot here with Ida and Lilith learning how to use glyphs so they can do magic again, with Lilith perfectly adapting to it and Ida obviously struggling with the basics because she's a wild witch and doesn't follow the rules, which makes sense. But other than that, it's not like this B-plot really matters aside from simply being comedic. And it's funny, but it's part of a larger problem. A lot of the B-plots this season tend to feel like afterthoughts, and while the A-plot is definitely what needs the most attention, the B-plots can sort of meander even if they themselves are plot important. Other than that, I don't have much to say of this episode. It hits all the right notes and ends on an intriguing cliffhanger, with the Golden Guard taking away the Blight's automaton and hinting that the Blights themselves were trying to create some sort of private army, which I'd like to see followed up on someday, but who knows. Gonna be honest, was not expecting an episode to focus on King of all characters, but they made one and it's pretty endearing. It focuses on how Ida and King met and where King got the idea that he used to be a tyrant who ruled over demons. And while it's obviously not true, watching King's perception of his life just crumble around him combined with Alex Hirsch's fantastic voice acting really sells the emotion, and it's kind of heartbreaking. It's not often that a voice actor can make crying sound this natural. Also, this happened and I proceeded to lose my shit for an entire minute. The island itself is interesting, and it's implied that it'll be looked at again in the future, but the main takeaway from this episode is that King has a father, unlike 60% of my audience, and he vows to one day be reunited with him. There's not much else I can really say about this episode because it doesn't really have anything wrong with it. It develops King and leaves some intriguing mysteries. I don't have much else to say. Unfortunately, episode 4 isn't all that great, and it's down to a few very simple issues. Just so we're on the same page, this feels like a mix of filler hijinks and meaningful character moments, yet none of which are actually done well. Like, we get a flashback at the beginning of Ida running away from home and her mom looking for her, so you'd think with Ida's mom's randomly showing up to the owl house it would be an episode about them reuniting after such a long time. But instead it's just explained that they already met up again multiple times in the past, and that Ida's mom is just a dipshitted curmudgeon who falls for Discord scams. Okay.
Mother visits Edelin regularly?
That's what I'm saying! The former option is cliche, and I ragged on that kind of stuff last time, but it doesn't mean you can't put effort into creating what is logically a much more powerful story. There's an entire thing with Lilith being neglected by her mom as a kid and even as an adult, and it's literally solved at the end because Lilith transforms into the Owl Beast alongside Ida, which prompts Gwen to go, lol, okay, I'm sorry. And then at the end, Lilith just leaves with Gwen to spend some time with her. It all feels very abrupt. I'm assuming they're going to explain how Ida just found the portal door in the ground near her house. According to the wiki, it was there for a few years at most, so you're telling me that it wasn't discovered at all. Big brown edge in the middle of the fucking ground, and Ida's the first to trip on it? Lamau? That seems rather convenient, Mr. Owlhouse. You can tell where the story is going as soon as Ida explains that Gwen's cures for her curse never work. So why play the story straight? Straight is not this show's thing. They try some misdirection by showing some guy getting cured by Pedro Gonzalez 2005 who's been feeding Gwen her free nitro scams, who for some reason sounds like Diego Renac.
Your aura is shining bright. Perhaps in return for my...
But it doesn't shake the feeling off. So if you were genuinely surprised when they went back to the guy and it turns out he was just a bunch of goblin creatures in a trench coat who was bathing in stolen money, what did Dana mean by this? Then I'm sorry, but I don't get how. There's no actual plot progression here aside from the oddly implemented B-plot where King decides that he needs to make his long-lost father come to him, and that's about it. My god, the emotion. The drama is reaching unparalleled heights. We got to see Lilith's Owl Beast though, that was cool. Oh yeah, there's also a random cliffhanger thing at the end where Gwen just tells Luz that she's not the only human to have lived in Bonesboro, and that one day the guy just vanished, leaving nothing but a book behind in the library. Wait, was that the only bit of really important plot progression here? Sure, that's incredibly interesting despite coming out of nowhere, but never mind. Like, overall, it's not a terrible episode, but it's definitely the worst of the season so far. It feels completely disconnected from what's currently going on, the pacing is a nightmare, and the story feels rushed and lazy. It's an amalgamation of the problems I had with season 1, but thankfully here it at least managed to stay intact despite its problems. Thankfully, this episode does not represent a decline, it instead signals the exact opposite. Episode 5 is two halves. There's the solid but somewhat predictable episode that finally gives Gus some time in the spotlight, and then there's the fulfilling and engaging Luz and Amity plot that follows up on the previous episode's cliffhanger, while also being responsible for why my Twitter timeline was assaulted by Lumity fan art for most of the summer. Okay, obligatory correction so I don't wake up with a pipe bomb in my mailbox. Luz is bi. I have to mention that because apparently some people think describing this as bi erasure. I don't get how that works, but alright. The Gus half is what you expect it to be, a band of misfit kids recruiting a new guy who have ulterior motives and end up being massive mega dicks. We know the score. But I'll admit, the way Gus handles them is pretty impressive and demonstrates how loyal he can be, and it ends with him being reassured that being an illusionist isn't all that bad, while also turning... fuck, what's his name? Marco, close enough, into a more fleshed out character, while also giving more subtle world building, this time to the Illusionist Coven. I'm disappointed that Gus is still relatively simple as far as characters go, but at least he has something compared to Willow. Despite Gus's half being okay, the Luz and Amity stuff is a lot more interesting as a result as it pushes the plot forward. It's also still refreshing to see Luz showing hesitation when doing dangerous stuff when she realizes Amity could lose her job at the library, and it's Amity who pushes forward with the idea. Hooray for character consistency! Eventually they find the book left by the human, but lo and behold, the mouse themselves are in there because the story can't just end here, can it? Well, apparently this is an echo mouse, which can play videos of any book it eats, I guess. That's kinda neat. Sure, it seems like an unorthodox way of making the information about the portal come slower as opposed to just giving them the book, but it functions. Anyway, one of Luz's brain cells disconnects and she shouts at it, which gets them caught and gets Amity fired. Luz manages to get Amity's job back off screen though, and Amity is struggling with her feelings for Luz, stating that she does stupid things out of her love for her, with Luz feeling the same way. Also choosing to dye her hair a different color, which is a neat way of her showing her disconnection from her mother's control since she wanted to keep it green. The mouse plays a portion of the human's journal, leaving more mysteries that I hope get solved, though these days it's hard to get your hopes up with that sort of thing. What else? Oh yeah, then Disney started going apeshit.
You always have a way of sneaking into people's hearts.
Don't let your kids watch it!
It's a cute moment, but the ship hasn't sailed yet. I will say though that while Lumity is technically being rushed out of the way, I still think it's being done better than the first season. Giving actual emotional conflict really assists the fast pacing of their scenes together, and also I'm happy that they're getting it out of the way as opposed to dragging it out for an obnoxious amount of time. Sure, it's not efficient, but it's a fuck lot better than this, because it allows them to focus more on the plot with very little meandering. Overall, good episode. It was about this point where I finally started to get hooked on the story, and I'm more attached to the characters now, and the next 5 episodes only continue to impress me. Episode 6 finally brings us back to Belos and the Emperor's Coven, and right out of the gate it hits a home run. And then the next scene is a full lap around field. We're talking about the Mets, baby, love the Mets, alright baby, let's go get a home run, baby, love the Mets, let's go Mets, as we get a glimpse of what Belos has planned with the help of all of the Coven leaders, while also revealing just how much of an effect Belos' unknown illness is having on him in an honestly disturbing scene. If Matthew Rhys's comment on Belos being misunderstood are true, then I can't wait to see what the truth behind his actions really is. This is also an episode that fleshes out the Golden Guard. He is apparently related to Belos and is one of the only people that seem to command genuine respect and trust from him. We've never seen Belos directly care for another person before. He also requires the magic from Palisman in order to keep his illness under control for some reason. But that's the setup and it's a damn great introduction. I haven't been this gripped by the opening minute of an episode for this show before. Great stuff. Anyway, Palisman Adoption Day, and everyone at Hexside, or I assume everyone in the class, is getting their Palisman and DILF. Everyone's able to obtain theirs just fine, but not Luz. This is because Luz deadass went up to the Palisman after hearing everyone else's wishes and went,
I want to be a witch.
Careful Luz, your ADHD is showing. Luz needs a wish with conviction since the Palisman bond through emotion, which has her come to terms with whether her adventures in the Boiling Isles have ever been worth it if she can't do magic when she goes back home. It's great to see more natural conflict emerging from the characters, love that shit. Luz takes a runaway Palisman back to Hexside when suddenly the Golden Guard takes the entire nest, but the ship gets attacked by... Who? I genuinely can't remember your name, but she's gone completely batshit between seasons and is homicidally jealous of the Golden Guard. No wonder Belos trusts him more. Man just pulled the greatest bros before hoes moment of the millennia. I unironically stan. Luz goes to recover the Golden Guard. He's a twink. This is Hunter, and he is the best character of the season. Burdened by great expectations, he does whatever he can to please Emperor Belos. He hates failure and fears being considered useless, but at the same time, his respect for the Emperor is relatively shaky, wanting to help him cure his illness, but visibly fearing his reaction to the solution. There are clear undertones of manipulation here, but it can also be argued that Belos does genuinely care about Hunter to a certain degree, and Hunter cares about Belos. It's a complex bond, and we don't have clear answers, but it's written incredibly well. Hunter is powerless without his Palisman, but Luz can't back away from him because she'd be leaving the Palisman that she has captured. So the two form an uneasy truce for the time being. We get glimpses of Hunter outside of his antagonistic personality where he is impressed with Luz's use of glyphs in order to perform magic, and almost goes into detail on wild magic before stopping himself, as if his loyalty to the Emperor's Coven is a chain that he's bound to. He's clearly envious of Luz's freedom, and after the two work together, he immediately turns on her after regaining his staff. but after being scolded by Luz, he lowers it, tells her his name, and lets Luz leave with the rescued palisman. Now, Hunter is not an insanely deep character that requires you to have a fucking master's degree in psychology to understand, but he's still a compelling and emotionally complex person, with the episode ending with the runaway palisman that grew fond of him throughout the episode becoming his new staff, with him eventually accepting it and wanting to keep it away from Belos, while Luz has the option to make a palisman whenever she wants once she finds conviction towards a specific goal. Can I just say, what a fantastic episode. This is the tightest the writing has ever been, and it's wonderful to watch the story unfold, even if at a surface level it seems like nothing special. Hunter is a great character, and Luz gets proper attention here too. It manages to ramp up the stakes, provide fulfilling reveals, and gets you asking more questions in a way that I don't see them skimming over so easily. Episode 7 begins with it's about Ida's fear of everyone leaving her, which eventually leads to her meeting with an old friend slash flame named Rain. I had to re-record that 4 times, who, despite being one of the Coven leaders seemingly assisting Belos, spends her time as a rebel against the throne and asks Ida to join them. Despite the simple premise, the episode gets heavy as fuck towards the end. The episode hinges on Ida and Rain's relationship. So much of the context and storytelling is told through visuals. It's not at all a stretch to say that Ida trying to lock her photo of King and Luz away in a chest that also contains the very symbol of her and Rain's relationship is indicative of how she pushes people away from her and buries her past relations to people. There's also the curse corrupting the frankly beautiful visuals of the bard magic, representing her feelings of having no closure, the things she could have done at the time, combined with the eventual realization that she was willing to commit suicide along with Rain just for the greater good, only for Rain to stop her after realizing what she would be losing. I'm not gonna lie, this was a very emotional episode. It's written so beautifully. It's not like this is mind-blowing or deep symbolism, like this is a fucking Disney show, not Evangelion for crying out loud. That is, if Evangelion even has symbolism, it gets harder to tell by the day. But it takes Ida, a character who has mostly been used to peddle jokes a la Grunkle Stan, and Rain, a character who was introduced in this very episode, and manages to tell a tragic love story between the two in just 20 minutes. Yet none of it feels rushed. It's like an explosion of story elements and themes that wonderfully mix together to create what I honestly think is the best episode of the entire show. A lot of it can fly over your head on first watch, but when you start analyzing what all of it means in the grand scheme of Owl House's story and the arcs of its characters, it hits you like a goddamn sledgehammer. The music and animation both working in harmony to create something emotionally complex and poignant. Now, when the hell have you ever heard me say something like that, huh? I get a lot of shit because my channel is just a big old whinge. A place where I comically exaggerate my frustrations with things I don't like because other people enjoy it. And it gets me views, like come on, this is an ER title verbatim. But when something is genuinely, like really deserving of credit, I can't just look away. This was the episode that finally turned me around on this show. I'm bloody invested. If you haven't watched this episode, I recommend you do. You may find that my praise is incredibly hyperbolic, you may disagree, but for what it's worth, this is the best episode of the Owl House so far. The B plot involving King and Luz, on the other hand, is a little disjointed. I got a kick out of the Train Your Dragon homage at the beginning. Yes, I am using the wiki as validation for that, crucify me, but it still feels like more of an afterthought, because if they're putting this much effort into their A plots to compensate, then I really don't mind as much. And that's not to say the ending of the B plot wasn't the most wholesome thing about the episode. God bless you, King, you freaking legend. And the looming threat of the Day of Unity is starting to feel like, well, a threat. The story's getting more intense, the themes are getting darker, and the show's getting more terrifying because the girl from the first episode appears for 20 seconds and she makes me uncomfortable.
And I practice the ancient art of fan fiction!
Oh, shut up. Overall, absolutely brilliant episode. Alright, let's just get it out of the way.
Amity Blight, do you want to go out with me? No.
Finally, this damn ship has started sailing, but it's personally not my favorite part of the episode. It's good, don't get me wrong, but I find King and Ida's segments to be a lot better personally. The episode revolves around Hooty trying to make himself useful by sorting out everyone's problems, and the irony that comes from them completely backfiring but in the best possible way and him thinking that he screwed it up. It's sort of like an anthology episode, like Tales of Ba Sing Se, only that at the very end it all ties together, so it's technically not an anthology, but you get what I mean, right? It's structured similarly. First of all, I don't hate Hooty that much, he has his moments. But who was the disgruntled masochist who thought having him be the narrator of the episode was a good idea? No matter what language you watch it in, it is grating and I wanted to swallow a spoonful of pills halfway into the episode. Dear God, someone shut him up already! Oh, thank God.
Fighting God!
Second of all, Hooty can eat shit for what he did in the ending. Okay, now for the actual episode. King's segment is all about his frustration and hurting over his dad not being there for him, and Hooty just sort of tells him, hey, let's focus on you instead, and King has to look inward for the answers he wants. King doesn't accept this at first, hyperventilating and doubting if his dad is even alive or out there, and in his rage, he releases an ultrasonic wave when he shouts? Hooty cries and then the segment ends.
The fuck?
Wow, that's an ending. King's segment is good, but the ending does feel rather inconclusive, and it's only really continued at the end of the episode, where he begins to learn more about himself as the days go by. In fact, a recurring theme for each character is having them look inward. Ida confronts not only her curse, but also aspects of herself, her past, the things she regrets, the things throughout her life that the curse ruined for her, or things that she made worse herself by pushing people away who wanted to help her. All displayed through her dreams, where she finally faces her curse and just talks with it, settling for a truce as they both come to accept each other. It's powerful stuff, and it also gives Ida a harpy form as opposed to the owl beast, and I'm just in love with this design. And so is DeviantArt. It's so cool. Lewis is a lot more direct than the previous two, where she struggles to either be herself or do what she thinks Amity would like, while also struggling with the conflict of focusing on the portal back to Earth and asking Amity straight out. And while the Tunnel of Love bit came off as really forced, I think that was the point. It's supposed to be representative of Luz's cheesiness and how she would try to be insanely extra if she had to ask Amity out, and it's contrasted by her freaking out and thinking it's lame because Amity would think it's lame, despite Luz being herself, working with Amity's fear of being the one to make the first move, and Amity liking Luz for being herself as well. It's again not subtle with its themes of self-acceptance, but they're so well done. And of course it ends with Lumity finally being canonized, but Amity is still very much a disaster lesbian, don't you worry. There's not much else to say other than this episode is a lot, and yet somehow they managed to make it work. It almost buckles under the weight of its own ambition, but it reveals one thing after another, hit after hit, while staying true to the show's themes and doing them justice in a more nuanced fashion than whatever the hell this was.
I practice the ancient art of fan fiction!
No, and after this episode, the hits still keep coming. Episode 9, while not as good as the previous two episodes, is pretty good. Although the start confused the heck out of me because Belos shows his face? Okay, that was certainly a choice. I mean, I knew it wasn't Sans Undertale under there, that was a joke, but it's an interesting decision that I'm torn on, because on one hand it removes a lot of his malice and intimidation, but on the other hand it's probably the point to give him more of a warm feeling when he's talking to Hunter, because this Belos...
But try that again and things won't end well for you.
And this Belos...
I love the young people.
Feel like two separate entities. Did the mask and voice really have that much of an impact, or is there something else here? Am I supposed to be torn? I'm probably missing the point here because I'm a complete dumbass, but it's a decision. We'll leave it at that. Anyway, Luz has the common cold, mold. So when the Echo Mouse starts playing a journal entry stating that Titan's blood can be used to travel in between dimensions when colliding with water, Amity, Ida, and King head over to Eclipse Lake and work with/against Hunter to find some. I would ask how Titan's blood creates rifts to other realms when colliding with water, but we're only 10 episodes into the season and the answer's probably obvious, so plot hole light, I guess. I like how Hunter is essentially a parallel to Amity. Hunter misinterpreting and convincing Amity that Luz's messages mean something entirely different not only shed light on how he views things, but it shows Amity's own fear of disappointing those that think she's important, whether that's a parent or a partner. With Hunter having the same feelings, just with Belos. He's tempted out of this mindset a number of times, and he does seem to feel genuine remorse for having to blackmail Amity just to get what he wanted. But the possibility of failure and of disappointing Belos is always sitting at the back of his mind. Other than that, the episode itself is just very entertaining and well paced, although I'm not a fan of getting cucked out of an action scene.
Alright, Owl Beast. Let's see what we can do!
Yeah, I'm sure no one wanted to see what happened next there. Also, the scene of Hunter literally digging his grave because he can't go back empty-handed, like, Jesus Christ, that's some dark shit. And the way he plays it off like he's literally going insane isn't helping. It's a great scene, but it hits you in the face with a brick out of nowhere. We get a pretty cool fight scene after this, and the animation is incredibly smooth. Now, I'm not a frame rate whore because I actually like looking at what the animators intend for you to see, but Owl House's fight scenes look consistently amazing, so mad props. At the end of the episode, episode, it's revealed that Amity broke the key in her grasp and has Titan's blood stained in her glove, while the portal key is slowly dripping its blood away in Hunter's hands. I don't know if this is enough Titan's blood to reactivate the portal, but the fact that they now have the key is a little worrying. Man, I did not expect to become so invested in this that I'm now making up my own theories and thinking about how the finale is gonna play out. With this much plot being given to us within 10 episodes, none of it being overwhelming, I can't wait to see how the finale plays out. Still cautiously optimistic because they can always pull another young blood old souls. I just want to take this episode apart. Okay, this is one hell of an emotional cliffhanger. So using the remaining Titan's blood, Luz is able to create a temporary portal back to Earth, but things don't go as planned. Instead, she ends up in some weird area between the realms, and her only method of making it to Earth is through projecting herself onto reflections. It's a pretty creative concept, and it looks beautiful. Now, remember the fake Luz that's currently still on Earth with Camila? Well, we finally get some answers. Turns out she was a shape-shifting creature from the Boiling Isles that made it through the portal door soon after Luz first arrived. And she pretty much took her place, not out of malice, but simply because she has nowhere to go. Camila took her in and finally gave her a place to belong to, so the current plan is to just have her take Luz's place until she finds an actual way back. Except V here needs magic to transform back, so that's what the rest of the episode hinges on, where we get to see just how different V's life living as Luz is compared to how Luz herself lives, making new friends and generally having a lot of things that Luz didn't have before she went to the Boiling Isles. And it sort of asks Luz if this is what her life could have been if she hadn't decided to stay with Ida for the summer. She could have met the same people and had a different life-changing experience, just sort of asking her what could have been. And the main thing the episode deals with is generally just a lot of humanity, even within these demons from another realm. And no, I'm not talking about the demonic rats that are behind the store.
Cool, talking rats.
Now come here, I'll tell you how to be a rat.
Luz's mom, realizing just how much she missed her daughter's creativity, that damn conversation at the end, it's such an emotionally charged moment, eventually spiraling out of comfort just from Luz saying something at the wrong time, Camila going into a panic thinking it was her that drove Luz away, promising her things will never be like that again, and just wanting her to come home. And that's what that conversation ends on. It doesn't end happily. It leaves us in the same position as Luz, and it's heartbreaking. Thanks to the sheer amount of development Luz has had over the course of the season, coupled with everything she's been through, I started to really feel the emotional baggage of this scene. It's masterfully done. Okay, enough sad stuff. I like that Camila didn't have a full-on breakdown upon realizing that the demon realm exists. Like, she realized pretty quickly that this was a serious situation, which I am so thankful for, you have no idea. Then there was Ronaldo, played by Roger Craig Smith after 10 cups of coffee, and he was terrible. But he was entertaining as a typical conspiracy nut, although he can sound a bit too much like Sonic the Hedgehog having a mental breakdown.
What? No, absolutely not! We made a verbal agreement! I quit heroing! And I quit this stupid group!
And guys, if you're stressed out over not having a decent MILF, boom, there you go, problem solved. I love so much of what they did here, fueling Luz's inner conflict of returning home or staying in the Isles, managing to flesh out and make us sympathize with V over the course of a single episode, and god, that final scene between Luz and Camila is just fantastic. There's a lot more that I could say, but I think I may want to leave it there. It's clear that this episode is going to have a massive impact on the story going forward. It's not my favorite so far, that still goes to Ida's Requiem, but this is definitely up there. Well, those are my thoughts on all the episodes that are currently out. I've never quite seen a cartoon manage to cram so much heavier story content into 10 episodes and somehow managed to make it feel natural. Owl House Season 2 hits you like a fucking sledgehammer with its plot progression, character development, and themes, all the while giving you enough time to take everything in and not be overwhelmed. The pacing is night and day compared to the first season. While the pacing is still very fast and at some points it can feel like it's close to collapsing in on itself, it holds out through each episode. Season 1's pacing, which I'd say most people can agree on by the way, feels unstable. It doesn't have that balance between fast as lightning action and story. Now don't get me wrong, there's story and then there's action, but the two just don't work together, and it can lead to the plot feeling very rushed or underdeveloped. Insert remaining salt for the season 1 finale here. So I'm glad that I'm not regularly suffering from an aneurysm in this case. The dialogue also feels a lot more natural, and the voice actors / actresses are regularly bringing their A game. I can't understate how good Alex Hirsch is during King's breakdown scenes. It genuinely sounds like he himself is on the verge of tears. Wendy Malick is still great as Ida, although it can sometimes sound like she's on the verge of a laughing fit during some of the more serious scenes.
It wasn't your fault. It was yours.
Sarah Nicole Robles, sorry if I mispronounced that, still does a damn fine job as Luz, etc, etc. All of the cast members deserve credit for bringing these characters to life. The animation is still great, I love how everything moves, I love the colors, still not sure about Luz's stone toss lip, but I can ignore that. Once everything gets smooth in the show, you know you're in for a visual delight, and scenes like Ida's Requiem specifically are stunning. The music is also pretty good too. I remember saying the music wasn't too memorable in season 1 outside of the opening and ending theme, but there are a lot of great tracks here that perfectly capture the essence of the scenes they're featured in. Ida's Requiem. And it all comes together naturally. What else? Ida's Requiem! Jesus Christ, I cannot understate how good this episode was. It just does everything right and then some. One of the best episodes of TV I've seen all year, fuck it. The story itself is getting a lot more intense and I can't wait to see what comes next. Granted, I still think the world building as a whole is flawed. I am still peeved at how Luz is just allowed to study every type of magic despite it being super illegal. I'll still accept it as a power move from Bump though, just saying. But season 2 definitely adds to it in a way that makes sense. So while season 1 has done some damage to it, I can live with it if the show is dead set on improving itself, and well, it's definitely doing that. The characters are so much more consistent, aside from Ida's little hiccup in the first episode, and are fully fleshed out, believable people. And the thematic substance here is so much more than just, oh, you have a Tumblr blog? Yes. Badass, let's do a crime! And has a much more broader spectrum of ideas applied to different characters, while also giving its main theme a lot more subtlety. If I made another video on this show, I would not have to use this attention-grabbing title anymore, because that's what the title was, attention-grabbing, while also making fun of how unsubtle the show was in season 1. I still think the dialogue in episode 1 is utter sewage, but seeing this show go from being okay but not my thing to something I am now 100% on board with in just 10 episodes, I mean, how do you do that? If you've been watching this video and haven't seen season 2 yet, I implore you, give it a shot. It's not the finest piece of animation ever or even close to the best thing I've seen all year, but the Owl House has become a remarkably solid fantasy show that I'll gladly watch until the end, which sadly doesn't seem to be too far away. As previously stated, Disney's treatment of the show hasn't been stellar, and I'm fearing for how the show is going to wrap things up in a satisfying way with just a handful of specials. But that's a topic for another video, if I make it. Wow, what a turnaround. I may not have hated the first season of this show, but I was convinced, like extremely convinced, that this show was going to get progressively worse and end with a whimper, just because I looked at a pattern for how a lot of modern cartoons with overarching storylines eventually meet their demise after a lot of hype. I feel bad for all of the shit I gave this show, even if it was justified, but I won't lie when I say I stand by a lot of my points in the first season. But Owl House Season 2 really is something special, I feel, and I'm glad I can finally talk about this show positively, instead of putting on an obnoxious asshole persona so I could say a bunch of jokes of no substance as like 50% of the video. While I am scared for how this show may end, I have a lot more confidence now, and so long as it keeps doing what it's been doing well with its pacing and storytelling, the Owl House is gonna be okay. Don't use that to bite me in the ass if shit hits the fan later on, let me be happy, damn it. Let me know what you thought in the comments. I hope you're having a good day, night, or whatever it is in your time zone, and take care.